Hello everyone, Mike Silverman here. In this video, I'm going to correct an error that I made in my last video about testing Socket.io applications, and then go over a little bit about test teardown in between each test so that you can make sure that all your tests in the same file aren't being affected by what you did in the previous test. Okay, so what I was doing last time is whenever there was an error that I wanted to fail the test for, I was calling resolve false. Instead, you just want to reject the promise. So over here, we have a function that creates a test user, and we can see that when you reject the promise, you can actually like write an error in there, and that's way better than what I was doing. I don't even know if resolving false would actually have caused my test to fail. So I think I was just doing that because it was the opposite of resolve true, and I was like, well, it should be false. Okay, so yeah, so every time I did that in the previous video, instead, you just reject, and then your test should fail, and you can tell it why it failed, which is an upgrade. Okay, another thing is that, um, okay, so I have these three tests in the same file, they're all passing, and I ran this a bunch of times in a row to make sure it wasn't flaky, so I'll just, you can run it again. Usually I run it like 5 times, and then I'm confident. But before I did a bunch of things to fix, like in between each test, there was some failures that were happening kind of randomly. It was definitely a very flaky test. So first thing I had to do to fix was I had to make sure that all my client sockets were connected when I create them. So if you remember back from the other video, I create the users by making an array of their emails, and then I call this create logged in users with connected sockets thing. And we go over here and look at that. I was just calling the connection to the sockets, but I wasn't waiting for it to connect. So to make sure you definitely wait for it to connect, what you do is after you call it here, you are going to wait for the connect message. So this is just my string enum of connect, but that would just be the word connect. To make sure I don't spell it wrong, I store it in a constant. And then once you receive the connection event on that socket, then you resolve that promise, and then you just wait for all these promises to evolve to their higher form. You wait for all these promises to resolve, and then you can return all your clients, and then you know that they connected because in order for those promises to resolve, they would have had to receive the connection event. Also, once you receive the connection event, you can stop listening to it. And since I'm reusing these same sockets and like disconnecting them and reconnecting them between each test, it's good to remove these events, which actually is the next point. But before we move on to the next point, I also want to point out that we also listen for the connect error event, which is the event that the socket.io server will give you if your socket couldn't connect for some reason, and then we will reject for that. So uh, to be honest, we should probably stop listening to that too. In well, we could put it in here, yeah, because if they already connected, they would not be getting the connection error event, and you don't want to be registering this multiple times. If you ever, I don't know, registered this later in your test for some reason, because it could get confusing, like what effect you put onto this could be different in two different places. All right, so further moving on with the thought of unregistering events is uh, my next point, which is between every between every test in the before each, because you don't really want to do it in the after each in case your test like didn't finish, it might not run the after each. Something like something something. Always do it in the before each if you really care about it happening for every test. Is what I've been told, and I think it makes sense. So we'll, I'm disconnecting every socket, so my application, whenever a socket's disconnected, it clears out everything related to them which might not be the case for every application. So that might not work for everyone, but for me, it does work. And whenever sockets disconnect, all their games are deleted, and there's not like anything left over from their existence in the past. But uh, if there is, you would just have to make sure you remove that some way. Okay, and then like the real point of it is though you need to unregister their listeners. So up here, where are we at? In the before each, we have this reconnection promises because in the after each, we disconnect them all. And what do we do? We remove all their listeners, which is a Socket.io built-in thing that just unregisters every listener for them. And the reason you really need to do this is like if you look at this first test here, user 5, we're waiting for their game creation list position here so they can hear from the waiting list. But also, I bet if I search for this further, I don't find it. But there is ones that you would find it. Like, what about this guy? No. Oh, because you know what? I destructure them. In previous tests, I didn't destructure it in this one. Yeah, there you go. See, here's another time where I register the exact same listener. Here's a third time where I register the exact same listener. And if you're reusing these from test to test, they're going to remember what you put onto it, and it's going to add more effects to it, which is bad because then you'll be confused. You'll say, why is something happening that I don't think it's supposed to? Probably because it's still remembering what it was supposed to do for that event from the last test. So you got to always unregister all your listeners at the beginning of each test. And then finally, one thing that's tripping me up is the before each, before after functions and all that. I had to use the same strategy I was using with the tests, where I have that asynchronous promise executor function, and I make a promise like that, and I was calling it tasks, and all your logic goes in there, and then at the bottom you can call tasks, then done, and you could also catch an error if you want. I like to spell it out fully. Okay. And then you could see if you rejected for some reason in here, which I don't think I call reject or anything. No, I don't. You can see. But if you did, then you could catch it. But this pattern will ensure that all of this actually finishes, because certain things, um, like I would have these before each is like run, and then they would finish, or they would say they were finished, but there was still logic running inside them, and then the test would start, and then this logic would execute midway, which doesn't make sense because you need it to be done before. But now it waits for that done to be called, and that done will only be called when you decide to be done. Uh, yeah, so that's basically it. That's my addendum to the previous Socket.io testing video. If you like this video, spray paint it on a street sign, the URL, so that people can find it. That is a joke. Do not deface public property. Okay. Well, with that being said, that's the end of the video. Goodbye.